Bluebonnet at the Marshall Train Depot by Mary Brooke Casad, illustrated by Benjamin Vincent. The Marshall Town Square was still and quiet as Bluebonnet the armadillo roamed about the old courthouse. Although it was night, the courthouse shone brightly, lit by hundreds of twinkling lights. "How beautiful," Bluebonnet said. "I've heard this Wonderland of Lights festival is the largest of its kind." She ambled around slowly, looking at the lights. "Marshall has lots of festivals," she said to herself. "I'd like to visit the Fire Ant Festival. Those fire ants sure do make a hot, spicy meal for us armadillos." Bluebonnet turned at the corner and began walking down Washington Street. "But for the visit, I've come to see the Marshall Train Depot, she said. The sun was coming up when the little traveling Texas armadillo arrived at the Marshall Train Depot. This depot was a large red brick building that stood between two railroad tracks. Bluebonnet peered through the fence and wondered aloud, "How do I get to the depot?" "This way," she heard a voice behind her, and felt something furry brush her tail. She turned and frowned in time to see a cat running to a small red building. Bluebonnet cautiously moved toward the building. The cat swished his tail back and forth, waiting for her patiently. "So you'd like to see the depot?" He closed his eyes slowly, then opened them wide. "Yes," said Bluebonnet shyly. "Well, I'm the one who can show you around. The name's TP," he said, twitching his whiskers. "I'm Bluebonnet," she said. "Tell me, what does TP stand for?" "Texas and Pacific," he said proudly. "I'm named for the railroad that made Marshall famous." "To get to the depot, we'll have to walk through this underground tunnel," TP said, and motioned for her to follow him down the steps. "Wow," exclaimed Bluebonnet. "It's like a big armadillo burrow." "This tunnel was built in 1940 to make a safe passage to the depot below the tracks," said TP. His voice echoed against the walls. "But the Texas and Pacific Railroad began long before that, and in an unusual way," he said. "In 1858, the track had been laid between Caddo Lake and Marshall. Rail service was due to begin, but the locomotive, which was being shipped by riverboat, had not arrived. So 3 yoke of oxen were hitched in front of 2 boxcars and 1 flat car. The oxen pulled the cars from Cabo Lake to Marshall. That was the first rail transportation used by this railroad company." They walked out of the tunnel into the light. "And here's the depot," said Bluebonnet. "When was it built?" "In 1912, said TP. "Lots of cats have worked here, ridding the depot of mice. It's my job now." He scratched his head. "So why have you come to Marshall?" he asked. "I travel all around Texas," said Bluebonnet. "I want to learn about the history of the depot and the railroads. It looks like you're the one who can help me." TP playfully pawed at the bow of Bluebonnet's sunbonnet. He rolled over on his back and batted Bluebonnet on her nose. "Hey!" said Bluebonnet, stepping back. TP laughed. "I've never had an armadillo friend before," he said, "but I'm glad you come to visit." Bluebonnet smiled. "Thank you," she said. "Come on in, Bluebonnet," said TP, heading for the door. "Let me show you around." Here's where the passengers purchased their train tickets, said TP. People have been riding the trains from Marshall's for over 100 years. Bluebonnet smiled at TP. I'm glad you're here to tell me all about it, she said. TP pointed to a map. For several years, the trains from Marshall only ran to Longview, Texas and Shreveport, Louisiana. Then in 1871, Congress granted the company a charter to build a railroad from Marshall all the way to the Pacific coast. That's when the company was named the Texas and Pacific Railroad Company. They climbed the stairs to the museum. Wow, said Bluebonnet, pointing to the pictures. Look at those steam locomotives. It took lots of coal to feed the fires that made the steam engines go, said TP. Those were the engines used to pull the passenger and freight trains. Before the days of cars and airplanes, people traveled by train. Bluebonnet and TP watched model trains speed along tiny tracks. Marshall was the T&P General Headquarters. People came to Marshall from all over the world to work for Texas and Pacific Railroad, said TP. Entire families worked for the TP. It must have been like a great big family, said Bluebonnet. Yes, said TP. Everyone in Marshall knew the train schedules and listened for the train whistle. Outside on the balcony, Bluebonnet and TP could see all around town. TP pointed down the tracks. In 1873, Marshall became home to the railroad shops, which were built up and down these tracks, said TP, waving his paw. The shops built the equipment needed to run the T&P. The two walked around to the other side. That's the Ginocchio Hotel, said TP, pointing to a building near the depot. Railroad passengers used to stay there, say they served the finest meal between New Orleans and Denver. Bluebonnet gazed over the balcony ledge. For a few moments she imagined Marshall in the early 1900s, a busy, bustling railroad town. TP seemed to be dreaming about the past, too. He yawned and stretched sleepily, warming himself in the sun. So, the days of the Texas and Pacific Railroad are no more? Said Bluebonnet. What happened? After World War II, the railroads declined, said TP. T&P retired its steam locomotives and used diesel engines. In 1976, Texas and Pacific Railroad Company merged with another railroad company, Missouri and Pacific. Years later, the company became the Union Pacific. But the trains still run through Marshall even today, said Bluebonnet. There are not as many as there used to be, but the freight and passenger trains still come through Marshall, said TP, nodding his head. Quietly, they crept down the stairs and followed the porch around the depot. This depot building has a special story, too, TP said. Years ago, it was almost torn down. Who saved it? Asked Bluebonnet. The people of Marshall, said TP, especially the children. The children wrote letters and drew pictures of the depot. They asked that the depot be restored and that they saved their pennies to help with the cost. So the people of Marshall helped restore the depot so we can all learn about the railroad, said Bluebonnet. It certainly does make a swell museum. Come on out to the caboose, Bluebonnet, TP said, running across the depot yard. The caboose? Bluebonnet asked, out of breath as she ran after him. That's what the last car of the train is called, said TP, but you don't see many cabooses anymore. That's what I like about Marshall. That's what I like about Marshall, said Bluebonnet. There are lots of historical things to see. TP jumped up on the caboose and Bluebonnet climbed aboard after him. "So this is what it would be like to ride a train," said Bluebonnet. "I've had lots of travels, but never on a train. Of course, you know all about trains and have probably ridden many times." TP hung his head. "No," he mewed sadly. "I've never ridden a train." Woo-woo! Bluebonnet jumped straight up in the air. "What's that?" she gasped. "Why, it's an old steam locomotive," explained TP. "I've never even seen one like that, much less ridden one." From their perch on the caboose, TP and Bluebonnet watched the train pull up beside the depot and stop. Suddenly, Bluebonnet turned to TP. "Let's go," she said. "Let's go for our first train ride together." "But I can't," hissed TP. "Sure you can," said Bluebonnet. "Let's just run and jump on. We've always wanted to take a big train ride. Trains go away and trains come back. You won't be gone long." "Bluebonnet, I do believe your traveling ways have rubbed off on me," said TP. "Let's go." "All aboard!" the conductor called. TP and Bluebonnet jumped off the caboose and ran across the depot yard. TP reached the train first and hopped on the step of the passenger car. "Come on, Bluebonnet," he shouted. Bluebonnet was running as fast as she could. "Woo-woo! Hurry, Bluebonnet," TP called. "The train is about to leave." With his claws outstretched, TP reached down and caught Bluebonnet by her sunbonnet and pulled her aboard. The train lurched forward as the wheels began to roll. "Whew!" sighed Bluebonnet. "We made it!" The cat and the armadillo found a seat by a window. "Now this," said Bluebonnet, "is a wonderful way to see the sights." "I can't believe it," TP purred happily. "I'm finally riding a train thanks to you, Bluebonnet." "Looks like we have a whole new adventure ahead of us," said Bluebonnet. "And when we return," said TP, "we'll come home to the Marshall Train Depot."